Hello, welcome back to my podcast. See, my instinct just makes me want to say Not Just Paleo. I literally did this for 200 plus episodes, so I'm still getting used to it being called the Evan Brand Show. Today, we're chatting with Daniel DeBaun. He's a guy who's founded a company who creates EMF protection devices. There's a lot of stuff out there that's garbage. It's bunk. It just doesn't work. I've actually tested the device that we're going to chat about today, but also we're going to chat about the risk of EMF and the link between miscarriages and breast cancer and melatonin suppression and other types of cancers, and the risk that cell phone towers and using a cell phone in the car and other sorts of daily exposures that we do and how that affects our health. If you don't make it till the end of the show, if you go to their website, Dan's company's website, which is DefenderShield.com, you can use the coupon code Not Just Paleo, no spaces. You'll get 10% off any of the EMF protection devices mentioned in this episode, but it's going to be super actionable. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So let's get into it. And then if you want to chat with me, I chat with with clients all the time about EMF and how to properly mitigate it in your home for optimal health, especially for children. So we can chat about that. You can schedule a functional medicine consult with me at my website, evanbrand.com. All right, let's go. Daniel DeBaun, welcome to the show.
Evan, thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, there's not a better way to start a Monday morning than chatting about EMF, so I'm really looking forward to it.
You're right. It's a topic of current conversation, so let's go at it and talk about it and help inform our listening audience to some stuff that's going on in the world of electromagnetic radiation.
Yes, sir. So you sent me your book, and the thing about the book, Radiation Nation, the fallout of modern technology, I like the fact that there's not any fear associated with the book. You just tell it straight how it is. You give us the science. You tell us what's up, where are the sources, what's up with EMF, and then how do you mitigate it? Because in this health space, some people, they create their business models around fear, and I'm just not a fan of being known as a fear monger, especially around a topic like EMF. Could you explain that? Why don't you bring a fear approach?
There is nothing to fear if you have an awareness of electromagnetic radiation. What is electromagnetic radiation? Well, if you go back 75 years ago, there really wasn't any electromagnetic radiation around us. There were no machines, equipment, electronics. There were no heavy-duty wiring close by. There was nothing that generated emissions that could actually impact our bodies. Fast forward to today, the electromagnetic radiation that you can't smell, you can't see, is all around us, and it's oftentimes very close to our bodies. So we have to be aware of the sources of emissions that potentially can influence the cells of our body and the way our body responds to the environment. So your laptop, your cell phone, your tablets, these devices 10 years ago were distant from us. So we had mainframes and we had this big heavy equipment, and now we put it to our heads, we put it to our laps, we put it to our pockets. And what is it that we put so close that we can't smell and we can't see? It's the transmission of the cell phone that connects to the cell tower. It's the Wi-Fi that is being used to connect to your router so your computer can connect to the internet. And then there's and that's called radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. That's in the it's slightly higher than the kind of electromagnetic radiation that you have from wires. If you have these 10,000 volt high power lines in back of your house, those emit extremely low frequency emissions at 60 hertz. Those are dangerous. The ones in your wall create those emissions. RF, however, is very different. It's being generated by the electronics that are around us for the communications function, as I mentioned. And oh, by the way, in nature, there is no such thing as electromagnetic radiation. I often share with audiences a cow in the middle of a field does not generate electromagnetic radiation. The radiation we're talking about is the stuff we've created in mankind to make our lives good. And to answer your question about the fear of these things, there's nothing to fear. We need to be aware of where we are in our environments and how we can minimize risks, and how easily we can do that with just simple metrics in our lives.
Now, how'd you get into this? Because you don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to study and write about EMF. How did that happen?
Well, it's funny. I ran technical laboratories for the Bell system. My organization wrote the standards, the electronic standards, and did all the testing of electronic equipment that's in the industry. And so I sort of retired from that industry 10, 15 years ago. And my wife was watching my young boys using their laptops on their lap 4 or 5 years ago. And my wife says intuitively, that can't be good for you. And my wife is not a science expert. Of course I am. And I instantly realized that there is extremely low frequency emissions and RF emissions coming out of that laptop. And I said, that is not a good thing for you to have close to your body. So we ended up trying to investigate and find proven, technically sound solutions for trying to mitigate those emissions. I couldn't find it. So I built systems that do it. And so we started actually as a company helping to serve customers with products that help minimize the exposures of electromagnetic radiation when it's close to your bodies. What prompted the book that we wrote, Radiation Nation, was that we were frustrated that there seemed to be so much misinformation out in the marketplace. We felt pretty compelled to try to help people understand the issues and take the fear out of what the problems were, and try to help all of us understand what actions we should take in our own lives.
For sure. So just people listening, the Bell system, this is led by, I guess it was the Bell Telephone Company and AT&T in the later years.
AT&T owned everything. Yeah, AT&T owned everything.
So you were setting
up companies?
You were setting up telephone services. This was pre-internet days when you were working in these companies.
Actually, I did all the analog and digital testing in the networks. So I was very familiar with all these subject matters and these emissions. They were all part of our testing programs.
So how much time have you spent around cell phone towers? And can you get us up to speed on what cell phone towers are emitting and what your risk is in terms of distance and things like that?
Okay. Well, let's talk about what electromagnetic radiation is. It's somewhere between 800 megahertz to several hundred gigahertz. Now, you don't really need to know those numbers. They're just a space, a span, a spectrum of emissions that are being generated. And in the case of a Wi-Fi, for example, or a cell tower, they're all around the 2 gigahertz range. Well, a microwave oven, and everyone knows what they are. They're in almost every household these days. What they do is generate a 2.3 gigahertz transmission, which is identical to the RF signal that's coming out of your cell phone. And what does that do? Well, it heats the water in the meat, and then it oscillates the cells. That oscillation heats the meat, and it gets cooked. Well, guess what? That's what happens when you put a cell phone to your head. It is an RF signal that is equivalent to exactly the same as a microwave oven. So when you're in front of a cell tower, the best thing to do is move away as much as you can, because there are literally dozens of transmitters that are transmitting close to up to 5 miles. And if that 5-mile strength of signal can go that far, when you're sitting very close by that signal is hitting your body and does affect you. So anytime you're close to cables, overhead wires, which is extremely low frequency stuff, or cell towers, you want to be at least 200 feet away if you can.
Now, I may have mentioned in previous podcasts about the inverse square law. So basically, the further away you get, the exponentially less risk you have. Now, I've told people, and one of the questions on my intake form when I work with new clients is to look up antennasearch.com and then find out how many towers are within a 4-mile radius. And the record right now is a girl up in New York City. She's got about 1,600 cell phone towers within a 4-mile radius of her house. And the least I've seen is, I want to say it's a client down in Montana. I think she had about 4 towers. And so there's got to be a difference, because here's what I notice. Clients that are exposed to more cell phone towers, more RF radiation, I notice there's a lot more anxiety disorders, there's a lot more depression issues, and there's a lot more insomnia and or mood issues. Could you speak on some of the health implications, what people would notice?
Let me help you think about the environments. There are 2 different environments. When you look at electromagnetic radiation, you're looking for the environment that is immediate around you. When you have something to your head, when you have something in your lap, the proximity to the body is 0 distance. That creates a whole raft of body impacts, which you can imagine. It literally attacks the cell. It weakens the cell. It then the calcium penetrates the cell. Then nitric oxide builds out in the cell. That can mutate the cell. That can become a very serious situation, and some of us, it can be very serious. So there's that environment. So there's the immediate environment. Now, when you talk about sleeping, if you have a cell phone that is 1 foot away from your head when you sleep, the process to create melatonin is impacted. As a result of it, it's interfering with the flow of melatonin to your brain for sleeping. So all of a sudden, you're having sleeping problems. And it's a direct connection to the emissions that are being generated from a cell phone. And in fact, in a room, anywhere in a house when you sleep, you don't want any Wi-Fi. You don't want your cell phone. For that matter, you want the clock that you have at least 3 or 4 foot away from you. You want the distance in those environments. That is very different than the transmitters around you from cell phone towers. Those are very different from the impacts to the body with Wi-Fi by your neighbor. It is very different than the impact you get from the wires, the high voltage wires to your house. That I call bees in the room. When you think about what happens with interference, let me give you an example of a classroom. We were talking that a cell tower, they generate 1.6 watts per kilogram. So that's not a really, really strong signal, but many of those can get pretty serious. In fact, Wi-Fi is very similar in terms of the energy levels. So when you have, let's say for a classroom, for example, and you take a Gauss meter as well as a voltmeter, and you go inside and you read the 3-dimensional signals that are being transmitted from all of the transmitting devices in the room, that can be almost a third. It can be almost a half a watt of emissions. So that can impact with ADHD. That can impact with sleeping problems. That can impact. So it's the environment that's around you. So you want to make sure that in that environment, you clean up the bees in the room. And you'll remember this because you'll think about it. one bee in a room won't kill you. One bee won't hurt you at all. One transmitter in a room won't hurt you. But if you have 1,000, that we know from science, it impacts the body in a very negative way.
So let me clear that up. You just said one transmitter won't hurt you. So you're saying you're not concerned about one Wi-Fi router in someone's house?
No. The answer is no. But let me give you the parameters of reasons I say no. When you have a router, we always recommend put it in the farthest part of the house as you can. That distance in itself is it helps reduce the exposure. In fact, you were talking about the exponential signal drop-off. Roughly 1 foot away, a cell phone is 80% of the dangers gone. By 4 foot, almost 98. So just by taking that Wi-Fi and putting it in another room and creating a distance of 10 feet or more makes it relatively safe. However, you want to make sure you don't have 10 Wi-Fis that are in the other room transmitting, because if you do, that increases the bees in the room and begins impacting the cells of your body.
Right. So, I mean, if you're in an apartment complex, you're in a condo, where you're in a dense neighborhood, for example, you're going to register 5, 10, 15 different Wi-Fis. To me, it just seems so much easier just to go hardwired. I've gone completely hardwired. I'm talking to you right now through a hardwired computer where I have a USB to Ethernet adapter, and then that goes directly to the modem. And at first, what I was doing, and people that listen to my show heard me probably a year or two ago, I was turning off my Wi-Fi at night, and I was noticing better sleep. And I said, well, if I'm working from home, why should I be exposing myself to Wi-Fi during the day? What is that doing to my energy levels and concentration? If I'm noticing improvement at nighttime without it, what am I going to notice without it during the day? And so I've just gone completely hardwired. And it's just, to me, it seems like an easier decision. That way you don't have to worry about it, especially because I've got a little one running around the house. You know, that also helps to justify me just ditching the Wi-Fi completely. Is that best case scenario, and is there a better scenario than hardwiring everything?
Evan, there's no question about it. If you can take an Ethernet connection from your switch, your router switch, and you can connect it to your laptop, or you can connect it to your smart TV, or you can connect it to the switch, the Ethernet switch that's at the TV. Anytime you can go hardwire, you eliminate the bees in the room. That's what you want to do. And there's no question. What I mentioned to you before was the distance. We said you got to be aware of the distance that you're from the device.
Yeah.
The other thing that's part of the bees in the room is the duration in which you're exposed. So when you're 8 hours are constantly exposed to an extremely low-level energy for 8-hour periods, that can impact the body's process. And that's what you just mentioned, Evan. When you turn the router off at night, you're taking that out of the space, and there is a minimal radio frequency emissions that are being transmitted into those rooms, and the body there's no impact. If it's not there, there's no impact to the cells.
You make a good point about discussing the immediate radiation that people are exposed to, because I think about the big zoomed out picture of cell phone towers and stuff like that, but you make a great point. I mean, I cannot even keep up with the amount of people that are driving while talking on the phone, texting while talking on the phone. I mean, it is so bad. I know certain states have banned it. I would hope for, I don't know, some more strict rules about it, because one, it's just not safe, but two, you've got so many distracted drivers on the road, and somebody slams on the brakes or they swerve into your lane and you look over and they're on the phone and they're trying to eat French fries at the same time. It's just like, good Lord. But that is a point that I forgot to mention, which is most people listening, they might not be able to do much about these external sources. Like maybe they can't just pack up and move away if they're closer to a cell phone tower. But they can stop putting the phone to their head. So like for me right now, I'm talking to you through one of your AirTube headsets, and I love this thing. Now, I got a question about AirTube headsets. When you've got the wire that still goes up your body, what are you transmitting there? Is that RF or what? What is that?
It's not RF. It's extreme low frequency. It's the stuff that is 300 hertz or below.
Okay.
0 to 300 hertz is the space that is, and it's very low energy. Where it becomes we were talking about the cell phone transmitted close to your head. So last year, there was a $25 million study by the National Toxicity Program, which is a division of the federal government. They created a laboratory environment. They eliminated all ambient emissions in the space. And it was an epidemiology study that had a statistically significant number of subjects. And what they did was they created transmitters from typical cell phones. And what they did was they transmitted for a period of time, and they did a study on impacts to the body. So what they found was, and these guys were really, really smart. They were just brilliant guys, because one of the things I didn't mention to you is RF signal is known as a thermal emitting signal. What that means is it heats your head by 2 degrees or less. That's what the standard states. You can't have any more power than 1.6 watts, because if you do, you're going to heat the head more than 2 inches, 2 degrees around the area of the head. And so what these guys did was they removed that impact of the emissions aspect of the signal, and all they did is looked at the biological impact. And what they found was that the frontal lobe and the heart increased with mutated cells, the DNA damaged cells. So there was no doubt, there was conclusive, statistically sound evidence by the federal government that says when you put something close to your head, when you put something close to your heart, when you put something close to your lap, there's an impact. And you need to be careful about putting stuff like that so close. And it's a matter of not a big deal. As you just point out, there are things you can do to minimize those exposures. I often cite another example. There are some physicians that I think are overreacting to the exposures. But what they're saying is, if you have a cell phone in your back pocket, a female in her back pocket, she's 12 years old, they're saying that there's enough evidence to suggest if that is in the pocket for extended periods of time, it potentially can impact the cells within the womb. And then the child becomes an adult, has potentially a DNA damaged cell, a mutated cell, that's part of the womb, and she has a baby. And then there's problems, and no one really knows the source of the problem. And it may be that the cell phone itself impacted the cells within the womb. And then you have the subtending generations beyond that being impacted by this young girl putting a cell phone in her pocket, in her pants.
Yeah, her back pocket, or in front, right by her ovaries, in her yoga pants, or in the bra.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's crazy.
There are some scientists that actually are concerned about some tending generations with the impact of these exposures. And Evan, as you probably know, there's a lot of study work on the impact to the breasts of a female.
Yep.
They become cancerous mutated cells in worse conditions, and there's evidence, lots of scientific evidence and demonstrated studies that have shown these links. And all you got to do is take it a foot away, and most of the danger's gone.
Exactly.
As simple as that.
I know.
It's not a complicated problem.
I know. It does seem so simple. I've seen so many guys that wear button-up shirts or any other type of shirts with the front pocket, and it's always over the heart, and they've got their iPhone just sitting there all day. And I had a friend of mine who's a cardiologist on the show, Jack Wolfson. He came on, and he said he talks to people all the time out in public, and he says, look, ma'am, I'm not checking you out, but I'm a cardiologist. Don't you think that cell phone's doing something to your heart? And most people are just clueless. They're just like, I never thought of that.
I know. It's a stunning. Evan, I have mentioned to you the impact to the cell.
Yes.
But remember, our bodies are conductivity, electrically managed conductivity within the body, and there's functions that are occurring in the body that are impacted. From science, we know these things. You can actually take a cell phone. You can put your hand up, and you could have somebody push it down, and they can feel the resistance. You can take a cell phone, put it right to your heart, and have that same person put your hands down, and what you'll find is there's less resistance. The cell phone is truly interacting with the electronic communications within the body, and it loses strength.
So you just talked about muscle testing. So you're saying you can literally muscle test a cell phone and find yourself to be weaker?
Oh, yeah, you can see the difference. Oh, yeah, there's no question about it. I consider that a Paula test, by the way. It's not the most scientific of evidence, but there's clearly direct links, and we do have those direct links in science, we understand. But if you don't believe it, put it to your heart and see what happens, and you'll see the impact.
Let me ask you, what do you know about the blood-brain barrier? Because I think a lot of the research that's going to come out is going to continue to point to the permeation. We talk about leaky gut, but for me, leaky brain or a permeable blood-brain barrier due to the EMF is going to be one of the biggest things that we're going to notice. And when we look at Alzheimer's and all of these other neurodegenerative diseases, for me, I always look at, for one, the gut, but two, the brain, because I've seen some studies about whether it was very low ELF frequencies or RF frequencies that can actually disrupt that protective blood-brain barrier, therefore allowing toxins into the brain.
Well, actually, that's a great study point. In fact, the gut is this. We interact with many customers throughout a day. Oftentimes, we get phone calls asking us to help them with electrohypersensitivity. By definition, that's what it is. They talk about the tingling in their hand when they use a cell phone. They talk about their heads hurting when they're near their laptops. They talk about a lot of things that are occurring in their lives that make it more difficult. And in some cases, we know some of our customers actually literally couldn't go outside. They were so impacted by the electromagnetic radiation that was surrounding them. So we've done some investigation into this space, and what we know is 20% of our population is electric hypersensitive in some form or format. So we know that they weren't born with that. So we believe, and science is proving to some extent, this is the relationship, that the gut itself is diminished in its ability to autoimmune. And so we actually, believe it or not, are working with a group of experts in the space, and we're looking at trying to build out the gut to improve the ability of the body itself to maintain the stability of the cells. And so I don't know if that is the problem with leaky brain, as you just talked about. But what we do know is an origin of a lot of the symptoms that we see every day is they weren't born that way. And so we're looking to build a strategy in helping our customers deal with that. But I agree in general, we have no clue what the impacts of these cells being exposed to emissions and to the body being exposed to these emissions and the long-term impacts. We do have a lot of evidence that demonstrates clearly we have a challenge, but I don't think this is still an open book. And we know it impacts the cells, the blood cells. We know it impacts the processes within the body. When you were talking about the brain challenge, that is interfering with process, and that is very real. There's just no doubt about it. But we don't have enough scientific evidence to point to that is a direct correlation.
Right.
We just don't know yet.
To me, it's silly, though. I mean, people say, oh, there's not enough evidence.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like, okay, why wait? You're going to wait 20 years, and then everybody shows up with XYZ, and then you're going to say, oh, now we know. I'd rather go ahead and take the preventative approach now. I want to ask you about smart meters a bit. I know we're jumping around in this discussion, but it's hard not to because there's different sources and different things that we're up against.
Exactly.
Now, if you've got a smart meter on your house and you've called the utility company and you've told them, look, I want to switch to an analog meter, and they will not do it. And no matter what you say, no matter if you send them the letters, I think it's called like Freedom Takers. It's like an organization that helps people get rid of smart meters. Let's just say all of those efforts fail and you have a smart meter, but it's at the far end of the house. Now, I know different utility companies, they're going to ping that signal to get a reading of your usage, and it's going to be different. Some may ping every 5 seconds, some may ping every 5 minutes, some may ping once a day or once a month. If you're at the other end of your house and that smart meter is there, let's say it was pinging every 5 seconds, but you spend most of your time in the room on the complete opposite side of the house. Due to the inverse square law there, does that mean your risk is relatively low?
There's absolutely no doubt. That's exactly what it means. Don't panic, because that is a 1 to 2 gigahertz transmission. It's a spurious. It's on and off. In some cases, very few times a day. Could be many, many times a day. It can be in maintenance modes and working constantly all day. And so there's various spaces in which it can perform. And it's a transmitter of about 1.6 watts. So what does that mean? If you're 20 foot away, you'll have no problem. If you're 10 foot away, you're fine. So long as you're making sure that you've reduced the number of bees in the room.
Exactly.
You work on reducing bees in the room so there's not this ambient that's increased within that space. So if it's on the wall, don't panic. And it really, honestly, if you're really, really worried, go get a piece of aluminum foil. And on the inside of where the meter is, put aluminum foil all where it is, and it won't transmit in that direction.
Yeah, I've heard about some fabrics that people are using now that you can integrate into your walls as well.
Yeah, that's all. Those are a piece of aluminum can do the same thing. Believe it or not.
Oh, okay, all right.
Just standard kitchen stuff is a piece of aluminum you can put on the inside wall, and it's what is an RF signal? It's an omnidirectional signal. What does that mean? What it means is there's a tiny little ball at the very tip of a transmitter, and it opens up a little bit, then it opens up a little bit more. It opens up more and more and more. It's in all directions, up, down, right, left. It's in all directions. What you do when you put a piece of aluminum on behind it, you prevent the signal from going the direction within the house. And what you're allowing is the transmitter to still go out. It's a simple, and that's what you want to try to do. But again, you're 20 foot away. If it's on a garage wall, don't worry about it. I would not panic.
Okay.
I'd panic if it's on the wall where I sleep.
Yep.
8 hours a night. That's a big problem.
For sure.
Yeah, that you gotta be. And in those cases, if that's where it is and you can't move it, you take your bed and go into another room, or you take the bed and put it at the far end of the room so you have at least 10 foot away from the transmitters.
Right. Okay. Got it. Now, we've talked about different frequencies. So you talked about, for example, like using an air tube headset with the cell phone, you may be around 300 millihertz, whereas with your Wi-Fi signals and such, you're going to be into the gigahertz. We've got like 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fis. We've got 5 gigahertz now Wi-Fi signals.
Right.
Generally speaking, when you go higher up into the gigahertz, does that increase risk? Is it that black and white? I guess I don't even know. Is it?
No, and here's some of the when I hate to go too detailed, but here's what you worry about when you had when cell phones came out 20, 30 years ago. The standard was created on an analog signal. An analog signal means it's a constant transmission. In other words, it's constantly moving out. That is a constant load. When the 4G, 3G came out, that is a digital signal. That is a on-off signal. It is not a constant load. So what does that mean? What that means is when you were before worried about it hitting your cell, it was not necessarily screwing around with the membrane of the cell because it was a constant load. So like, say, for example, you take 10,000-pound load, put it on a piece of concrete, and watch it, see if it breaks. It won't. Concrete will stay there forever at 10,000-pound load. Now you introduce a digital load, on and off, on and off. You take 10,000 pounds on a piece of concrete, and then you lift it up and down, lift it up and down. Guess what happens? Concrete breaks.
Got it.
That is a jackhammer impact to the cell with the digital signals that are being transmitted today. Now, I don't know if you were going to this, but there's this 5G stuff going on.
Yeah, I think Austin, Texas, by the way, which is where I used to live and I will never live again, is, I believe they're going to be one of the first cities in the United States to implement a 5G cell phone signal. So talk us through about the 5G here. Yeah,
so now I'm going to give you what you were looking for before. You were asking me what the impact of this stuff. I'm going to now explain. Now that you have this jackhammer, it's going 5G up till 30 gigahertz. There's a 30 gigahertz span from 1 to 30 gigahertz that never existed. So that's speeding everything up, but that's not changing the load to the cell. However, they're using what they refer to as MIMO, multiple in, multiple out. That means when they transmit information, they transmit it over not one path, but two paths. That is and what does that mean? It's like if you have water that you're filling up your pool with, and it's really slow with the one garden hose, you put two garden hoses in. But what does that do? It doubles the speed in which you fill the pool. Well, that doubles the speed which you now are transmitting and receiving. But now you have two jackhammers.
Got it. Now, are you saying 5G is going to use the same range in terms of like millihertz? It's going to use the same range, but it's just going to be multiple signals.
Yeah. No, we talked about, you said 2.4 and 5 gigahertz,
right.
Wi-Fi, right? And cell phones are around 2, 900 megahertz to the 2 megahertz range, roughly speaking. When you, I'll tell a story in Wi-Fi. When you sell 2.4 gigahertz and you go to 5 gigahertz, they say that's broadband. Why is that broadband? Well, the reason it's broadband is twice the stuff is going across the transmission. Twice. So that's how come it's faster. It's twice as fast. The data is going from one place to the next twice as fast than the 2.4. Well, with 5G, it's not 4 gigahertz. It's not 2.4 gigahertz. It's not 5 gigahertz. It can be up to 30 gigahertz. So it's much, much faster. But in and of itself, that doesn't impact the cell. What impacts the cell is now you have two hoses, not one, the MIMO.
Got it. Yeah,
and those are dangerous.
I was just reading about the MIMO. So here's a little bit of background for people listening about mobile generations. So the first 2G system was deployed in 1992. The 3G system appeared in 2001. 4G came out in 2012, and then 5G is coming out this summer of 2017. Right. Okay, that's interesting. And I think it's pretty interesting, I guess that's the word I'll use, when you see articles like this that say AT&T is running trials of 5G wireless in Austin this year. It's like, what are they looking for in their trial? I'm guessing it's a different trial than what my trial would be. AT&T says that their wireless network grew 150,000% from 2007 to 2015. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, well, actually, what they mean by trial is they're going to get a transmitter, a cell phone tower, and they're going to get a bunch of phones, and they're going to see if everything works. That's what that means.
Okay.
Yet, a point of fact is there's literally been no science study impact to the cell as a result of that increased speed using a MIMO technology to transmit signal.
The new 5G. Yeah, I mean, well,
right.
How could
and
they just
it was
developed
a big thing. The FCC said there's no big deal. Literally, they said we're not worried about it. And so the FCC standard was written 30 some years ago, as we said, right?
Yep.
What they said is we don't want to send it for more than 1.6 watts per meter squared because we know it heats up 2 degrees. Well, they never considered the biological impact of the cell, and now you know it was an analog signal.
Oh,
not a digital signal.
Let me get this right. Let me restate that in a different way just to make sure it's clear for me, but also the listeners. So the FCC back in the 70s or whenever this was, 80s, 90s, when the radiation standards were set, they were taking a look at only thermal exposure. How much does tissue get heated by these radiation, not what's happening biologically to the cells. And this was using a constant signal, which was at a lower frequency. Now we're using a pulsed signal at a higher frequency, but that's never been tested for biologic effect.
That's exactly right, Evan. It's sort of interesting how that is. And oh, by the way, a point of fact, when the standard, there was a fella who was part of the CTIA, which is a body of Wi-Fi cell phone service providers, and he ended up having the job as the chairman of the FCC, reviewing the standard to see if it's acceptable or not. I'm not saying he was biased, but I would be suspicious.
Well, I mean, if you just type in cell phone carriers lobbying, you can read about how all these big companies, including Sprint and all these other companies, are lobbying the FCC anyway. So, I mean, how would we get new research unless it was independently done? Because to me, this is the new smoking, and if it were to come out that this stuff is so bad, you've got 7 billion phones you got more phones on the planet than people. But here's the thing, Dan. I don't think the average person cares, though. It's like they could hear all of this and they don't give a damn because they love their iPhone and they love scrolling on Instagram too much to give it up.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. And they should do some things with our precautionary, as you pointed out before, to mitigate it. Hopefully they will. But let me give you another statistic. When that standard was created and I had a cell phone, I didn't have anybody to call. My buddies didn't have cell phones. So when they set the standards, they set it on casual use. And as you just pointed out today, your 12-year-old son or daughter is sitting with a cell phone to their head. That's not casual use. They're using it constantly. As a result of the last 10 years, significant growth in cell phone use worldwide, to the point where there's one cell phone roughly for every person who lives on the planet of the Earth. This is a situation in which we have these transmitters being transmitted. What we know for the last 10 years, a point of fact, is the frontal lobe cancers to cell phone use, directly correlated to that transfer of the cell phone use, has grown 2% per year and compounded for the last 10 years.
Interesting.
Now, I don't know if that's important to you, but it's certainly a fact of science.
Wow. Now, let me ask you this. The future, there's the survival of the human species, fertility, etc., included, health, not being cancerous, etc. Do you believe the future of humans, is it how Darwin says survival of the fittest. Now, and I guess this is really this is more of a statement than a question, I guess. My belief is that the future is going to be the survival of, I don't know, I guess you would call it the biohackers, or the people that are going to implement mitigation strategies, going organic, reducing Wi-Fi, reducing cell phone risk, spending more time in nature away from these signals, spending more time in less urban areas where you don't have 1,600 cell phone towers in a 4-mile radius. What's your thought on the future of humanity and EMF at the current state and pace that we're headed?
Well, it's funny. Some of our science experts think we're in a laboratory test right now, and everyone's looking to see what the result of the study is, and we haven't seen statistically sound study work with scientific evidence that's clear and evident up to this point that the masses do. By the way, if you look at smoking, cigarettes, and cancer, I was 12 years old. I smoked cigarettes many, many years ago. And at that time, there was no evidence whatsoever in public domain that there was cancer links. Okay, fast forward today, now we all know that there's a link. And when you smoke, you're doing it at your risk, and science already has a direct link. Well, guess what? When I began smoking at 12 years old, the science community knew. The only thing that was different is that the courts, the subject of smoking went to court, and they lost.
Yep.
And it was that event that actually got everyone to think about it.
I saw that. I watched that video on YouTube. It was like a classic video. I think it was in the 70s, and I think it was Congress asking these bigwigs of these smoking companies, do you know that smoking cigarettes causes cancer? And they just sit there and denied and denied and denied. They look like such fools when you look back at the video.
Evan, let me tell you the story. Back in the late 70s, 78, there was a physicians group in the UK, and the chairman of Philip Morris, was asked, does this impact a pregnant woman? And he said, no, it does not. However, the baby will be smaller. And what woman wouldn't want a smaller baby? That's what he said in that review. It was like bizarre how cavalier they were with the lives of all of us. So let's get back to your question. Do I really know what's going to happen in the future? This is what I do know. I know that only 20% of us can really ultimately feel it. That's a statistic we all pretty know in science with electromagnetic radiation. We don't know if it's genetically based or not. Some people will not be impacted, so their genes will keep them protected. Others won't. Right. We don't know the impact. But there's no doubt it will modify some people's lives, probably in the 20% range or less, in some way or in a severe way. Hopefully not too bad.
Right. Now, let's go back. I got a couple follow-up questions. In terms of cell phone towers, so if you go on antennasearch.com and you do find that there's cell phone towers, what is the minimum distance that you would like to be? Because I saw a study that was done in Brazil, and you could basically plot the dots on a map of the instance of cancer within a 500-meter range, basically 500-meter circle around this tower. Everybody started getting cancer as soon as they put up that tower. So to me, if they say 500 meters, I'd rather be triple that amount. But what would you say is the minimum distance, if you were scoping out a house, the minimum distance you would like to be from a tower?
The general rule in our industry is stay at least 200 feet or more.
See, that's nothing.
Which is nothing. What I recommend to our customers, don't walk but run. Don't ever buy near. And the reason why is what I said to you before. It's not just the distance. It's the exposure throughout a 24-hour period.
Right.
And that's where the dangers lie. It is a low-voltage signal that is a constant load. That's a digital load on the cells over long, long periods of 24 hours a day. So I would say I personally would recommend at least a quarter of a mile away, if not longer. These signals go, as I said, up to 5 miles.
Yeah, so for example, just for the conversion here, so 500 meters, which is what this Brazil study I looked at showed, these cancer instances, that was 0.31 miles. So
that's about, that's why I said I would go farther, no closer than that at all.
I'd say a mile. That's what my gut says.
Oh yeah, Evan, my starting point was don't go anywhere near it.
Exactly.
When you go and you see if you have power lines, 10,000 volt lines in your backyard, go take a fluorescent light bulb, walk back there, and probably within 200 feet, you'll see the thing light up.
I've heard that. So that really does work?
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Those energy levels are that strong, and interesting. I got to tell you a story. I worked with in Bell Labs when I was in Bell Labs, and the expert at that time for the Bell system on the power emissions. And when cell phones came out, he said, "There's no way I would ever put it to my head." And he was referring to the power lines. And there are digital RF ELF from cell phones, believe it or not. There's up to 15 milligauss, 10 milligauss, which is a substantial amount of emissions.
Yeah, we didn't hit on magnetic
I haven't even
fields too
talked
much.
I haven't even talked about that.
Yeah, I got out of a house last summer. There were power lines in front of the house. Now, they weren't the massive high voltage ones. They were like the old school. It was a kind of like a 50s or 60s neighborhood. It was the power lines that were above ground. They maybe sit 15 feet above your head on the street. So they were still emitting plenty of power, but they weren't the super high power lines. And I was measuring about 7 milligauss in the front yard and then 2 milligauss in the house. And everything I've been told is for children and just for your own health, you want to be less than 1 milligauss in the home, especially where you sleep. And so I got out immediately, and now I'm at a place where I'm at a baseline of about 0.2 milligauss, and I just sleep so much better at night, partially maybe because of the reduced risk, but probably just peace of mind, really.
No, there's actually impact. You know, what I didn't mention to you before, what is an extremely low frequency milligauss level that could be dangerous? And we were talking about fertility before. Cindy Sage is one of the scientists we work with, and she did a study years ago, and she found that at 15 milligauss, which, by the way, is not much. 2 milligauss you were talking about is nothing. That's definitely a safe zone. But this was 15, and that's actually fairly low. And what she found was that there was an increased probability of miscarriage by 3 times the normal.
Triple the,
from
yeah.
15 milligauss. So you're right. You really do want to try to find the best space to live in and have the lowest levels that you can get. And 2 is actually, by the way, 2 to 4 milligauss is the international measure of safe for ELF.
Yeah, the guidelines that I use the building biology guidelines. They've got like 100-page document or something, and they've got like these strict evaluation guidelines. They'll tell you the conventional, almost like laboratory testing, like blood testing for people. You know, the conventional range is crap, and then you've got a functional range, which is much tighter. And they've got your AC fields, so like your ELF and your VLF, they've got levels there of where you want to be, and they just say, basically, long story short, to save people hearing the numbers, the least number you can get, the better. And that's radio frequency, that's DC fields, that's AC fields, that's magnetic fields. I had one more question for you, and I can't remember what it was now. Oh, yeah, I do remember. Cell phone use in cars. Talk us through that a bit.
Yeah. When you use... Well, first of all, I got to remind you, a cell phone has a cell phone transmitter, a Wi-Fi transmitter, and a Bluetooth transmitter. There are 3 independent transmissions that are of a digital ilk coming from that cell phone. And then you have the DC ELF stuff coming off of there.
Right.
So I wanted to say there's a lot of stuff coming out of that. If you don't need the Wi-Fi in your cell phone, turn it off.
Yep.
If you don't need your Bluetooth, turn it off. I will not have any of those device active functions active when I use my phone. And so let's go back to your question. In a car, what's going on? Well, there is a barrier, a metal barrier that's in your car. And so what happens? Cell phones can transmit at 3 different levels: low, medium, and high. Most of the time, it's directly correlated to the distance to the cell tower. If you are 50 feet away, it's really low. If you are 3 miles away, it's very high.
Right.
Most of the time these days, it's medium to low. So given I said that, in a car, it's always the highest.
Because it has to work harder. And then...
Because it got to work harder. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask you about flying. So basically, long story short, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I know we're running out of time. So basically, long story short, if you have to use a cell phone, would you just suggest trying to pull over and make the call there? Because when you're driving, aren't you having to pulse that signal higher to connect to each tower as you're driving down the road? Okay, you passed that tower. Now you're approaching this tower.
That's exactly what happens.
Okay.
And I will not have my cell phone on in a car.
So I put mine on airplane mode. I never have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth on, and then I just leave it on airplane mode, and I just hope that if something ever happened and, I got in a wreck, hopefully I'd be able to scroll down and turn off airplane mode and make the phone call. I trust that I will be able to. Now, in terms of flying, I don't personally like flying often for many reasons. The bleed air is disgusting, breathing in the jet fumes and such, the way they put the bleed air into the cabins, but you've also got everybody with 2 or 3 devices each on planes. So would you advise anything like, say, wearing one of those EMF canopies and wrapping yourself in that while you're on a plane? Is that worth the effort?
Well, this is what I know. Cockpits and cabins of aircraft there's a significant number of transmitters for communications that are RF. And so what does that mean? That's the bees in the room problem. That's not the zero distance to the body problem. It's the bees in the room problem. And so, quite honestly, if you're in it for an hour, I wouldn't panic. If you're in it for 3 hours, it definitely is impacting your body. Whether you need to go to the extreme with shielding of the body with some of the clothing types available is a choice you need to make. But there's no doubt it's impacting your body the longer you're in it, the aircraft.
I wonder if there's any brands that, if not, you should work with me and let's develop a brand of clothing that has some type of material inside of it where we could use like organic cotton interweaved with something else. The bed canopies, I'm trying to figure out what exactly they use. Let's see, they use cotton.
But they typically use a fabric that's infused with conductive materials.
Is it silver or what are they infusing it with?
Yeah, typically silver. There's a lot of that kind of available in the marketplace. And the reality of it is it does work. They're not 100%, but they certainly are probably around the 60, 70% range.
That's huge. I mean, if I was forced to live in New York City, I would like to wear an EMF clothing.
Well, you asked me the question before, what do you do in an apartment? That's a serious place because that's a lot of bees in the room, and a canopy is the kind of thing some people think about as a way to reduce the exposures. And RF is very easily conducted by those materials. So you can conduct it to ground, and it's keeping you safe. There's no doubt.
Ah, that's cool. Okay, so if you, let's just say these bed canopies and such that people will use, those aren't really grounded necessarily. That's just the fabric itself that's that's protecting you. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
You want to know something crazy? I just found something called the Block Bag. It's a microwave radiation protection sleeping bag. It's $350, and you sleep in this bag. The lady in this picture, she's got like the net over her face. She looks like she's suffocating herself a bit here, but that is interesting.
I don't know.
There's all kind of stuff coming out.
There is a lot of things, but I got to tell you, you got to just be cautious. It's not, you don't overreact, but be aware. It does impact you.
I know we're out of time. I want to ask you this, though. This is my last question. Maybe I'll have one more after, but please shed some light on these ridiculous EMF pendants that you see people wearing.
Oh, gosh. Evan, that's why I got into this. When I of course, I'm a engineer running laboratories for years and years of the Bell system. So when I came involved, I actually tried to find a product to help protect my boys. I couldn't find it because they didn't even understand the problem. Most of these manufacturers, if not all of them at that time. So pendants, they do nothing. They are placebo at best. They do not have any sort of magic. Buttons, a lot of products. In fact, when you look for a solution, you really want to find manufacturers who have independent laboratory study work that states independently that it does what it says it does. And you don't want to have studies that are indirect. Oh, look, the blood changed slightly. That means nothing. You have to look at the electrical signals. You have to look at the impact of the electrical signal with the device. So you really want to make sure. Like we have our company, DefenderShield. We went to a laboratory in Atlanta, and we said, test our products to make sure we do what we do. That way, everyone who bought our product would know it does what it says. We actually knew more about testing than they did, but we weren't independent.
Right.
So a word of caution: make sure whatever they say, and it's not independent testing; it's direct testing. We have customers often where we saw them with a button device, for example, on a cell phone.
Yep. And
actually, a very well-known person came to us, and they were electrically hypersensitive, and they had this button, and I took it off their product, and I said, put your phone in here. They put it in, they used it, and they could actually use it without their head burning. We actually do what we say we do, but be careful about. I don't believe in a lot of stuff that's out there, and if you want to believe it, make sure they have studies that demonstrate it.
All right,
that's independent.
You brought up one other thing I have to ask. My understanding of the cell phone radiation cases is that when you try to start blocking the cell phone's radiation, that you're going to cause the cell phone to go into that high power output setting because you're drowning out its ability to reach the tower. So therefore, it's going to crank up and create more EMF. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, that's not true at all. It may be true with some products, but what you want to take that omnidirectional signal, you want to be able to put a barrier by the transmitting part of the cell phone and allow it to continue transmitting normally. It can see the cell tower, and it can transmit to the cell tower.
So you're only blocking one side. Is that right?
You're only blocking, you're not blocking all of it. You're blocking the side that's to your body. And it doesn't do anything it doesn't increase the amplitude of the signal from low to high because you have a barrier there.
Okay. Either way, I'm going to guess you still, even with a protective case, you're still not going to put the cell phone to your head. Is that correct? You personally?
Actually, I do. I never would put a cell phone on my head. I have no problem putting it to my head. Not at all.
All right.
Because I know the signal's not there.
Okay.
Yeah, and very safe. And when I I never put my phone in my pockets. I do now. I just throw it in my pants pocket, and I don't think twice about it.
You're brave. No,
because,
I'm just kidding.
well, I have those barriers that we have. We actually have very, very sophisticated technology we use.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have a discount code for people. So at the end of the show, after we wrap this up, I'll have a discount code for you so you can check out some of Dan's products. I've got the pad for my laptop, which is great. I've tested it. I've measured it. I know it says, oh, look, we've tested it. I test everything myself. If somebody makes claims, I make sure. And it does check out. This pad is awesome. And then, like I mentioned, I'm talking to you on the AirTube headset, which
Hey,
is
Evan,
also awesome.
those earphones, I wanted to make sure they were the highest fidelity as well as safe to use.
Agree.
So,
a lot of the AirTube headsets out there, they sound terrible.
Junk. They're junk. You can't use them.
I know. These are the best ones. So I want to say thanks. I begged your company a bit. I said, hey, look, come on. I've promoted your guys' products before. I'm a big fan. Come on, send me an AirTube headset. And they said, okay, you're a one-time special person, and your company sent me an AirTube headset. So it's much appreciated, and I promise it'll come back to you 10x.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Dan. Any last words of wisdom or advice before we let you go here?
No, except I really, we've said it a bunch of times today. Do not panic. Don't get upset. Keep distance from you with devices if you choose not to have any protection devices that you can buy. And you're perfectly safe. Remain 1 foot away, 80% danger's gone. 4 foot, 98.
Yep.
Don't forget the bees in the room. Make sure when you don't need it on, you turn it off. When when you have a bunch of stuff in a room, make sure you take away the stuff that can be eliminated by hardwiring. Simple things keep your family safe. And let's not be part of the scientific study to see the impacts to our bodies.
Agreed.
Let's take an action, and a little bit of precaution in every measures goes a long way in this space. And so those are my words of wisdom.
Absolutely, Dan. Much appreciated. Look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thanks again for your time, your wisdom, and for doing the work that people don't do. They come out and they make some crazy claim about a product, and then it's crap. So I'm so glad. And I've got a couple of friends who have used those little cell phone radiation dots, and it's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? How's that going to do anything?
Yeah. Well, thanks an awful lot, Evan, for inviting us on your show. We really appreciate it. And for us, it's pretty important that we help people understand their environment, and it's changing.
Yeah.
With Radiation Nation, and it's really a definitive view of where it came from, where it is, and where it's going, and what you can do about it as a family. And so I encourage everyone, if they'd like, to think about learning a little bit more. And it's not in a scary way, but in a way that helps you make informed decisions.
For sure. We'll put a link up on my website, evanbrand.com, for the book Radiation Nation, or just Google it. You'll find it. Pick up a copy. It's definitely worth the read, and it's a level-headed approach to this whole subject. So, Dan, thanks again for your time. Much appreciated.
Thanks again.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. As we mentioned, if you go to DefenderShield.com, they are not paying me to tell you to do this. I'm just providing the discount code because they gave me one. So you go to DefenderShield.com and you enter the coupon code Not Just Paleo at checkout. You'll get 10% off. Like I said, I have the laptop pad. That's what I use. I don't have the cell phone case. I'm not near my cell phone enough to justify using that. I don't use any of the other devices. I do use the AirTube headset with the microphone attached to it. So check it out, DefenderShield.com. Use the coupon code NotJustPaleo at checkout. You'll get 10% off. And then if you want to schedule a consult with me, you can visit my site, as you know, but I'll tell you again, evanbrand.com. Also, I want you to go subscribe to my YouTube channel. We've got thousands of people over there, but I'm putting up several videos per week at this point. I've been at a pretty good pace, pretty good rhythm putting out content there. I've published several videos this week, and I'm going to publish several more videos as the next week comes. Videos such as improving your air quality in your home, some of the root causes of chronic fatigue, some signs and symptoms of Hashimoto's and how to treat thyroid disease naturally, etc., etc. So just go to YouTube, type in Evan Brand, subscribe to my channel. I'll chat with you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
He acts like it's all good, yeah, like everything's cool. Kiss her, got a line, let me please her. She doesn't have a clue that he's terrible news. Why I'm in a tie, I got to watch out, girl. Don't wanna see her cry her eyes out, girl. Cause I've been watching, you've been hurting.